Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Platform Enterprise, the podcast branch of Platform, media for people who are pissed off with capitalism. I'm your host, Rachel Donald, and I'm a journalist working at the intersection of media and activism. You can find my most recent work over at www.platformenterprise.com, where you can also subscribe to get my newsletter and this podcast delivered to your inbox every week. On this week's show is the acclaimed poet Joelle Taylor. Joelle is actually credited with bringing slam to the UK, and so much of her work and this conversation has been about platforming working class voices and tearing down that ivory tower to build bridges between people. Joelle is phenomenal and hilarious, and I know you're going to really enjoy listening to her. So, before you go, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a comment if you're feeling generous. I would also highly recommend picking up a copy of her book, which just launched this week. Woo! Congratulations, Joelle. c+nto and Other Poems, published by Westbourne Press, is available, so go and pick a copy up on their website, or you can check out their Instagram to win a limited edition. Finally, you can watch this episode with Joelle over on Satellite. Follow the links at www.platformenterprise.com. All right, without further ado, here is the formidable Joelle Taylor. Joelle, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Rachel.
So when we started our conversation with Alice, which became 2 individual interviews, which I'm really pleased about, you started initially talking about how you got into slam. Well, actually, how you brought slam to the UK, and you were talking about how it's a kind of like a working class art form. Am I right in?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, this relates to the whole spoken word scene. So
Mm.
slam is it's the voices of the marginalized. It's a way of working class, black, other kind of marginalized writers taking sidestepping the gatekeepers in literature. You own your own work. You go onto a stage. You create your own community. And slam is as much about the audience as it is about the poet on the stage and about the poem. So you get this incredible dynamic. And the early slam, ambassador slams in the early 2000s across London were like football matches because the audience comes prepared, absolutely prepared to show love. And I, as a host, would encourage them, that's where you get the whole clicking fingers thing in slam.
Mm.
Not from me, by the way, I didn't invent that. I just use these methods, shouting, having banners up, letting off streamers, that kind of thing. There's a real sense of the community coming toward the poetry or toward the child, toward the poet. And then as soon as they began to speak, there's absolute silence. And that's a rare thing for people who are never, the center of the narrative, are always the margins of the page. Slam puts the margins into the center of the page, which I think had a huge effect on the cultural life of the world, but particularly this country at that time.
Wow. What an amazing sentiment. Taking
Well,
people from the margins and into center stage under the spotlight and giving them the space and giving them the
yeah.
audience.
And the really interesting thing is of course, this you mentioned spotlight. So the spotlight's trained on that particular poet, but that's not really where the spotlight is.
Mm.
It's backstage. We couldn't have predicted it, that these kids who were all very committed to the postcode wars of that time. There was, a lot of kind of gang stuff happening around London, but still is. Um, and these people who were sworn enemies on the streets were comforting each other backstage. When you stripped
Mm.
away the economy of the streets and just put someone in a little blank green room where they can hear people shouting on stage or shouting at the people on stage, that sense of, even though they can hear roars and applause, it was an arena. It was kind of gladiatorial, and they were all
Mm.
set in City Hall. So we wanted to set them where all the political decisions were being made in London, and it's a kind of almost glass amphitheater, and with bulletproof glass surrounding the stage area, so that it was kind of really gladiatorial. And it, looking back, there was something very initiation like about that process for kids who were, having real difficulties at school, failing in traditional education. But for some reason, either they or their teachers had spotted something in them. This kid that people were terrified of had spotted something in them and thought, right, let's see if they want to do this, if they want to rap on stage with no music, so that people actually listen to them. And it had, yeah, it's a most incredible, powerful impact on the communities and on poetry. And that's when the spoken word scene, I think I spoke last time about one of the side effects of doing this is that I sent spoken word artists, rappers, etc., into schools, including myself, to do these 2-day workshops. So loads of kids started to get interested in spoken word because they were empowered not just to watch the stuff; they were doing it very quickly.
Mm.
After 2 days, we filmed everybody. It's a very quick course in confidence, finding your voice and self-confidence. Again, there's some kind of, I don't know, maybe there's something gladiatorial about everything I do. I think it's that sense coming from the working classes, that sense of challenge, and me knowing what it did to me, how it transformed my life. 2 minutes
Mm.
transformed my life, and to be honest, it was the longest. My first gig, 2-minute set, was the longest of my entire life. Those 2 minutes went very slowly, but I came out the other end, with a purpose,
Yeah.
and people looking at me slightly differently, you
Yeah.
know? So that's the power of slam, and the failure of slam is when people forget the backstage, they forget the audience, they forget that it's about community, and the poem is created by all the people in that building at that time, and start to look at who the star is. So that's one of the reasons.
This is I want to get into that with you, and also to reflect on that in accordance with the history of
Mm.
slam that you mentioned last time, because I think when people think about spoken word nowadays, it seems to have just kind of sprung out of the zeitgeist in like 5 years. We know that's not true,
Yeah.
and it's really God, you know, the brand that's coming to mind is like BuzzFeed. When BuzzFeed puts up the videos, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of white college students, on stage doing their spoken word pieces.
Mm.
Now, when you were first organizing slam in London, they were writing things about you in newsletters that the streets would be safe for one night because you were getting all of the, problem
Yeah.
kids off the street. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the so this is another reason why I say that slam has not been as successful as it's been in other countries here in the UK. It's the class system. We have, and obviously a part of the class system is racist as well.
Mm,
Um, so the initial responses, and remember, this was all being administered by the Poetry Society, one of the most prestigious and longest running poetry and literature organizations in the world, and they're wonderful people, but they've got the reputation of because poetry is class based. You can't talk about
mm,
poetry without talking about class. The reputation of kind of representing the more upper middle class white kind of demographic, it's not actually true, but that's the reputation.
yeah.
So they tried really hard to explain to people what slam was and how uh, you know, um, to explode some of the myths. I mean, I could talk a long time about. I don't want to give people's names out, but one young black poet who won the London Wide Slam Championship is now a famous poet. They were asked to go on Blue Peter,
Mm,
and I was like, "This is absolutely brilliant!" Yes, and it was all going ahead until the last minute when it came about that they simply assumed that they could rap. And this is a poet, not a rapper, but they'd made an association based on slam and based on skin color that
oh,
or
no.
race that this is what it meant. And of course it doesn't. Slam is all kinds of things. It's rap, it's MC,
Yeah,
and it's poetry, it's spoken word, it's monologue.
yeah,
It's 3 minutes in front of an audience. That's essentially what it is. So there were a lot of problems faced. And also the class system in this country, and it's not me who raised this. This is Dan S. Smith from the States, who's a big slam champion and also a prize-winning poetry collection writer as well. They said, like, essentially, we have a system where we don't value what we believe to be working class. So the fact that spoken word venues were yeah, about 10 years ago started packing out. I run Outspoken with Anthony Nexaguru, Karim Kamar at the South Bank Centre, and that's a 300 seats. We sell out every single month. You know, they've got big events, but still, this idea that it's not real literature, it's not real poetry. Yeah. And this is about the class system. It's about accessibility to poetry. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
on panels literally talking about whether people like me should have access to poetry. That's essentially what they're saying. You know, is
God.
poetry poetry if we can all really understand it straight away?
Oh my
I mean, there
God.
is, I mean, they're a diminishing crew, you know,
Yeah.
because what's happened is people like Anthony Naxaguru, have kind of, and Raymond Antrobus have all risen from the live poetry scene and are dominating in terms of their published works as well. Kyle Chingoni is another one, Jay Bernard. They're really transgressing these barriers, you
Yeah.
know, winning the major literary prizes, and they're wonderful performers, though they wouldn't probably describe themselves as such now. Yeah, so I mean, the whole idea of slam is socio-political. It is not about who is the best, you know, a star. The star system is a wonderful idea, but it's used as a prop for neoliberalism. When we separate people out and say that this is the star, that means everybody else around them isn't. You know, we
Mm.
make the naughty kid a prefect. You know, you do that in school, we do it in life as well. And I think it's entirely capitalist that we have this kind of idea of star authors. And often things are based on, these days, on views. Can you imagine how weird that was for someone like me? Like
Mm.
when you've had a career pre-internet and then suddenly social medias start
Yeah.
when you're like about 40, and then you're suddenly like, wow, people are getting publishing deals on the strength of their Twitter followers.
Yeah.
What, you know, and if you're not
Yeah.
part of the internet generation, you just kind of go, but
Yeah.
what about their poetry, man?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. But even as somebody who is part of, I wrote a book last year, right?
yeah.
And it's 40,000 words of prose poetry.
Oh,
It
wow.
was the most horrific labor.
Yeah.
And I'm it's the thing I'm most proud of in my life. And I sent it away, to agents and to publishers, and in so many of the submission guidelines, I was like, and tell us about, your following.
Yeah.
Essentially, tell us about your social capital. This has nothing to do
Exactly.
with my social capital.
There you
I
go.
like, literature isn't just like, I understand that it's a business model in a capitalist system. So, like, the idea is to eventually make a profit, but also, how are these new writers going to come through in today's world? And furthermore, how are different types of writers going to
Yes.
come through? Like, if it's
Mm.
just everybody that some kind of like Twitter or TikTok or influencer or whatever, then you're going to have a very homogenous group of people carving out.
It's exactly it, Rachel. And so, I mean, I was with Slam Ambassadors 18 years roughly as the artistic director, and then I left. And now I'm taking over as commissioning editor or editor of Outspoken Press, which is actually
Mm.
my publisher. Um, and Anthony and ex Guru, the publisher, just sort of said to me, right, well, take over for 2 years, because I wanted a project where I remembered the old days of these supportive publishing houses that would focus, say, on women or lesbians or another kind of group. Um, and so a really odd thing happened. So became you're working class. You're made an editor. Suddenly you get a sense of prestige and value. Start wearing tweeds, doing the whole thing. And then I asked for books, women to send me books, and I got 97 manuscripts, and I could have published at least half of them. But as I'm reading
Mm.
them, I realized that I hadn't really left Slam Ambassadors, because I'd created that project. So really, in a sense, Slam Ambassadors is my persona, my spirit, or whatever, you know. But and so what I really wanted to do is develop writers Because
Yeah.
if you put a shout out for working class writers, you might get some, but a lot of the work would be stuff that just doesn't work very well on the page,
Mm.
or they've gone to university, they've done the creative writing courses, and they are developing this voice, which is quite is interesting, but is not giving us anything new. Do you see what
Right.
I mean? It's
Yeah.
still, I mean, so I
But
decided
then,
I'd try and develop.
well, exactly. How can you expect anyone to deliver anything new when new isn't what sells and new isn't what
Exactly.
gets you noticed? It's even in the like submission guidelines when they're like, tell me which one of my current clients your book is
Yes.
like, and it's like nothing. No, like it's not. That was the whole point. I'm
But and
you
this is
know?
it. It's not just about developing writers, it's about developing publishers. And we know that
Oh
the
my
publishing
god.
industry, whilst it seems to me to be really staffed by women, women have very
Mm.
little kind of power within that system. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
but
Yep.
also they are tending to be white, middle class women. There seems to be an overrepresentation from Oxbridge. They're also amazing. I've got an agent, by the way, and she's banging. Um, but this is the demographic, and maybe
Yeah.
part of what independent presses need to suggest to the wider publishing world is that they do some development courses for agents as well, just to look at different materials. I mean,
Definitely.
I'm being careful what I'm saying here because I don't want to insult people who do amazing work, and they all
Mm.
really do. But like, I need to know. My level of knowledge kind of is surrounds it's about my environment and myself. If I
Mm.
want to learn about something else, I need to go and seek it out. I won't
Mm.
magically know who is writing the best, fiction in South Africa, etc. You've got to constantly develop yourself. And I think because agents have such a key role in selling the work, representing the work, talking to other agents, i.e., being able to affect some kind of cultural shift between them,
Yeah.
that we need to sort of try and link together and say, because, say, what can we do now to broaden it? These schemes for Black writers are brilliant, but will it be there next year?
Yeah.
How do we make this core rather than,
Yeah.
we're going to do this
Yeah.
scheme?
Yeah. And even then, now I'm not a person of color, so somebody might want to correct me on this, but how do we give marginalized writers also the freedom to write about what they want and
Mm,
not just, for example, their marginalization?
yeah.
Because that's something that I really feel kind of coming through is like, yeah, people, okay, yes, we want women writers and we want people of color and we want,
Mm,
handy capable and all this stuff. And it's like, do you want them to write about their trauma?
yeah.
Because that sells? Like, is that what
Yeah.
you're after? Like, that, because that's
There's
what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a very real thing. I experienced some of that myself in a different way because I was well known for a couple of poems about council estates and about sort of growing up working class and about gang
Mm,
culture. That there was a need for me to write about that in my prose, and I was like, it's two poems, and it's not actually what I write. But even more, there's been a good
mm,
shift happening, really interesting. And I hope he won't. There is a very famous writer, very well known for writing about gang culture. It's a black male writer. Um, I'll just say it's Courtier Newland, who's an absolutely brilliant writer. I'm a huge fan of his work. And I know him as well. And I know that he's felt a pull towards speculative fiction for a long, long time, over a decade. But the demand for his work was always in the sphere of what made him famous in the first place, which is a book called The Scholar.
right.
But he has just released his first major speculative fiction novel called A River Called Time, which I've just started.
Ooh.
And, that is such a huge cultural shift for
Yeah.
writers, black
Yeah.
writers. I mean, I know it's part of kind of Afrofuturism, so you had to develop the sort of landscape to allow these things to happen. But I think with Courtier's book coming out, that opens things up again. Selena Godden, who is again a really good friend and a major spoken word artist, has just released Mrs. Death, which again
Mm,
is kind of magical, speculative fiction and goes against what you would think that she should write about.
mm,
as a spoken word artist,
Mm.
a mixed race woman. It's so things are changing. There is a need. There are some really great agencies at the moment. Like there's one I think called Own It, who do remarkable work. And the more of that there is, it becomes the zeitgeist. It becomes funky to be representative, to have different narratives for the love of God. You know?
Right. Because, and I think we should tie this back to neoliberal and capitalism, liberalism.
Mm,
Wow, neoliberalism and capitalism, as you were saying, because that's fantastic for Selena and Courtier, and that's so important to pave the way for future young writers.
mm.
But still, it remains that it's like they need more social capital because of where they're coming from in order to have like the
Yeah,
space, you know,
yeah.
to do that. Like when and this is like a super mainstream but really really I think important example, you know, when Beyonce started, like there's a SNL skit like, oh my god, Beyonce's black, like she's making music for black people, and it's like she had to jump through a lot of white hoops to get there, you know.
Mm,
And
yeah,
does that actually reframe, you know, how much of that actually reframes the narrative for
yeah.
young artists, or
Well, that's
does
it.
it
The
concretize?
process dominates the content. The form
Yeah.
becomes the content. That's exactly what we were saying about the star system. This
Mm,
whole idea. So yeah, you can't. It's so evil genius, isn't it? Because it makes us all want to go through that system. You know you've
right.
made it. You know, as a writer yourself, you could self-publish that piece of work. It doesn't have the sort of Vanity Press doesn't have that shame anymore. But you
Yeah.
know, as a writer, that what you really want and need is an agent, because that will
Yeah.
lead to other work, and it will
Yeah.
lead to you feeling valued and valuable. Even
Hmm.
though you know in your core that you don't stop being a writer at any
Mm,
point, no matter what happens, you are still an artist. They've got us all believing that we need this agent, because then we need
yep.
a big publishing deal. And the bigger the
Yeah.
deal, the better.
Yeah.
And it's not fame in the way that people necessarily think about it. As artists, we need people to know about us,
Yeah.
because that's how we sell our work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not in that respect. To dismantle that whole system is a project. It's an ideology,
Yeah.
you know. But part of what I wanted to do with Outspoken Press is begin that. Lisa
Mm.
Locke is one of the authors. I'm sure when you spoke to her, she mentioned this, but she would only be published by an economy of the sisterhood, as she calls it. So she wanted only women to be in part of the process. And then out of the blue, I did this. I'm thinking about continuing it. The more I
Yeah.
think about it, obviously, Outspoken Press will probably go to another editor after me for a different kind of flavored tenureship. But it's definitely something that I think is worth maybe forming something that's a publishing house, an agency, a sort of centre that we can run in the old way. See, I miss the old cooperatives. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
lot of arguments and it was basically just a bitch fest, but the sense of self belief and ownership is so valuable to what we all do. We should,
Yeah.
no, Rachel, we should just go and squat somewhere and set up. Except I need like a hot bath these days. I need a little jumper.
You know, the actually the original idea for Platform Enterprise was a publishing house
Right.
that was meant to put ownership, living wage, and royalties back in the hands of authors, and to combat the monopolies of, you know, Amazon and online sellers. I'm very, very, very worried about this feedback loop of you know, Amazon rating and Amazon algorithms and other online selling algorithms that are just going to create this very um what's the fancy word I'm looking for? Mimic, imitative,
Mm.
um, simulacrum, you know,
Yeah.
just that. There's no
Simulation.
literature. Yeah,
Mm.
there's no literature. And of course, it's literature, but like it's really, really hard to access, and it's not what's
Yeah.
being pushed forward. And it's these formulaic pieces of entertainment essentially that don't do anything to make the world a better place, which I know is a lofty thing to aim at, but generally that's kind of what art does, art with a
Yeah.
capital A,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely, absolutely. That sounds fantastic. It really something you should pursue 100%. And the more
Yeah.
of us who do these things, the more headway we can make. Although it does feel like it's sinking because it's like with spoken word. When I started, 6 people in a boiled suite would come and see you. We were all attached in some way to live music. So you had a
Yeah.
certainly in the punk movement, you'd have a poet, a performance poet before.
Mm.
They were all men though, all men apart from
Mm.
Jules Denby, who I fashioned myself after. But, you know, so that thing happens where you work a long time and you seed a scene through the schools and through kind of, just through persistence. And
Yeah.
then finally, we get a lot of people here, at which point, capitalism, neoliberalism becomes very interested and takes over.
Yeah, it
And so
becomes
you get a
co-opted.
gentrification. Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
yeah,
And you were like that thing of the star, that's the method of co-opting it.
yeah,
That's the method of seeding out, the 0.001% and shining all of the attention over there, which essentially slows the movement down so, so, so much with the
mm,
weight of so many souls scrambling
yeah,
for their 3 minutes, which they deserve.
yeah.
Because, of course, they're an artist if they feel that desire to get up and speak.
Yeah, and if
And
you're working at it, that's what you are. You know,
yeah,
it's not a big philosophical question, is it? You know,
no,
you're still a carpenter if no one sees you make the chair.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That tree that fell in the forest, still is tree.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah.
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 But it's what you were saying at the beginning about it being backstage. Like that's where the
Mm,
community evolved, and that's where people found togetherness, and that's
mm.
what slam was at that time, and what it still should be.
Yeah, I
And it,
mean, and, I mean,
please,
I'm talking very negatively about what happened with slam in this country, partly because I travel the world and I feature at different slams and I see what they've done. So
right?
US is a hyper capitalist model, but we are jealous. Obviously, if you can pick 3 grand up a gig, if you can fill these, huge stages, that's wonderful. But it is creating over there a kind of the slam style, a way of doing something because it's the most effective way of
Mm,
using those 3 minutes. Really, it kind of pairs away diversity in a sense, which
yeah.
was the whole reason it was set up. Yeah, but the slams do still happen here. I mean, like Hammer and Tongue do some great adult slam stuff, and I've featured at a couple of them, and the audience is still, really there. But Youth Slam did something extraordinary. I guess because as kind of difficult as their lives were, they're still kids, so they still believe. And if you tell them that they have some control and show them how and
Mm,
make them want to come back. You know what makes kids come back to workshops? The other kids in the room. You've
yeah.
just got to make people like each other and they will come week after week and quite by accident learn all about imagery and associative poetry and metaphor. That's the background noise to them just being, I belong. And that's the very first stage of becoming an artist, belonging. I know
Mm,
as a writer yourself, you've spent most of your life alone. Your life as the real you. And you really, as writers, we really need that connection,
yeah.
to get our work going. I've been writing a novel now for this one 3 years, just over 3 years. It
Yeah.
should it really it's awful. It's
Yeah.
a terrible book now. I've
Yeah.
changed
The-
so much.
yeah, but novel writing is it, it 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 is the hardest undertaking, and like I don't think people get it because
Keep
it's
one
work.
thought for 3 to 5 years. You keep one thought in
Mm-mm.
your
And
brain
it's
and
no,
yeah.
and then you change it, and it's done now, and you
Yeah,
can't go back.
yeah.
There are no bones that with which you can recover the body of what it once was. Like it's all mixed up. It's fossils.
Yeah.
Next project.
Have you ever spent years on something and then just took the wrong path at the last minute and felt trapped down there? So people who are
A
listening
relationship?
work? Yeah, like, it's like I did that recently with the night alphabet. I realized that I'd gone down a path that was impossible for me to get out of without
Yeah.
getting the path getting darker and darker and darker,
Yeah.
me more and more lost. And I was down there for weeks, and then suddenly I
Mm.
realized that I was a writer and I could just change it. And I was like, oh, I just don't do that then, you know. But that's the extent of art and how much belief we have to put into what we do, you know?
Of course, especially as a no, I'm not going to say especially as a writer because I don't do any other art forms and that's not fair, but you were locked away in your damn attic with a pen and a piece of paper. Like, nobody's around cheerleading you. Nobody's there saying, oh, nobody can just walk in and be like, oh, yes, this has really progressed in the
Yeah.
last, 3 hours. No, 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 no. You are on your own until you feel like you have something good enough to send to an editor who is
Mm,
normally a good pal, who is just
yes.
extremely, like, sympathetic. Like, it's a
Yeah.
very isolating art form.
Oh,
Like, if you don't believe,
my favorite bit of so I obviously live for the live performance. I love touring, I love international touring, and I love, just the actual physical act of performing and meeting people. But to progress, I wanna write novels and books, and
yeah.
I've just finished my latest poetry collection. I sent it off for review, and it's this weird period of time where nothing happens. Like, I'm just empty. I'm just waiting. I'm
Yeah.
just literally sat in this chair, and I'll be
Yeah.
here for about 3 months now, and just waiting to see
Yeah.
if anybody replies at all,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. But
is
this
it any
this
good? I've got no idea because there's
but
no
you
live
should.
gig.
And this is neoliberal capitalism again, like this validation of it. And like also, why is it not normal to be empty after you finish a work? Who is that guy? Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. Listen, I loved it. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. It's like totally zeitgeisty. But when he was like, you finish one thing and you start your next project the next day, I was like, bitch, excuse me.
Excuse me? My next project is lying down.
Like, at what point, if I just keep writing, this is for me anyway. If I just write every day, I'm only ever going to be writing myself. Like, I need to go out and I need to absorb other
That's a very
things.
good point. Research is core to fiction writing, obviously to kind of more factual writing, but to fiction. In poetry sometimes, like because I've written 2 books which certainly Songs My Enemy Taught Me was very, very research based about women's experiences globally, and I led 18 masterclasses with different groups of
Wow.
women marginalized in the world. So women, who'd suffered FGM, women in prison,
Wow.
refugees, and that research process is absolutely core to it. Poetry, less so. So you can kind
Mm.
of, hmm, I'm not saying it's good poetry, but you can kind of get in a zone because you can skip around an idea from different angles really quickly. In a short
Mm.
story, for example, you could do that, but it would take so much brain power. The focus. I've tried to write a story from 4 different perspectives, and I lost interest after 3. I was just like, who cares? Yes, it's clever, but let's face it, nobody cares. And I do
Yeah,
think there should be more outlets for novelists, and for poets who dominate the page. I know there's a lot of poetry reading events. I've done quite a few of them. But maybe novelists, people who are, um, locked away more, maybe book slams. They do have an event called Book
Mm.
Slam, but it's for published books. It'd be cool to have a book slam that isn't for published books with
Yeah.
oh, gladiatorial again, and the audience could be agents. They can
I
do the
immediately
work
went
for
there too.
they hold up scorecards.
Yeah.
Yeah. My God, I went from, like, egalitarian to fascist really quickly there, didn't I? But, I mean, I think, creating the community where we can connect and share work, because it's the most terrifying thing in the world. I set
Totally.
up an online, feedback groups called The Circle. If you wanna join it, you can find it on Twitter. And it's women and non-binary writers, professional writers, who share work with each other every week, and give each other honest feedback. And my idea was, don't say anything good about the piece first. We'll
Huh.
assume that we're all professional writers.
Yeah.
What we have to figure out as a group is how we make this piece stronger. And of course,
Mm.
being a bunch of women, everyone's like, yeah, we'll do that. And the first few kind of feedback sessions, we were like, we stuck to it. But now it's just like, oh my God, you're amazing.
Yeah.
Also,
But
have you thought about doing and then I haven't been active in the group for a couple of months, because I'm too scared to share my own work. I will go on stage where
really,
I can control it. Yeah, I get really, really nervous. It's a kind of really scary thing to me.
after 20 years on the stage,
Yeah, because
after
I control that. And I
Mm.
and when you perform a piece, there is a greater sense of physical ownership,
Oh,
obviously.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
But I think, like, page poets, novelists have an extraordinary courage,
You know,
patience. Patience.
Alice and I were kind of talking about this actually, about how when you perform, you always like stay in communion with your piece. But when you put it out onto the page, I think the phrase I used was like kicking out of the nest. It's got to go and build its own relationships with the readers, and you have no control over that. It's going to be whatever it needs to be to that person, and someone may love it and someone may hate it. Um, so yeah, I get that. It's different. It's naked. It's even though
Yeah.
you can totally hide behind poetry in its absurdity. Um, it's how do I put this? It's a part of you, but it's not you. It's the rib that became Eve, you
Oh,
know?
that's good. Take a
Oh.
note. Take a note. No, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think, like, when you come from the live environment, you get instant feedback. As you grow older and understand more and become a better writer, you understand that a lot of the feedback is about how you say the words, the performance, the
Mm,
delivery of it. But then what's happened with me is the words are slowly taking over. The work is becoming less performative because I'm allowing
mm,
the work to take over. But I still, on that stage, have ultimate control. Like, I have literally followed people to the toilets. You know, I can stand next to them. If somebody doesn't clap, I did an event, and these two these two women, I don't know what I'd done to annoy them, but they sat at the front with their arms crossed. Whenever, like, very deliberately did that
yeah,
when everybody else clapped. I got a standing ovation. They were clearly disapproving, but you can just do it right back at them, right in their face. You can't do that to
yeah.
your readers, but I was like, it's okay. Hello, you know, wow. But but there is a greater sense of physical ownership, but also you feel physically, Rachel. We're what, 75%, 80% water. And we know
Mm.
that when we have a sound, water ripples and it makes shapes. So while enduring a live performance, I'm getting all kinds of ripples. That sounds really creepy. But I
Yeah.
mean, my body is literally, physically, organically responding to this moment. You know, I'm changing shape inside, and the same is happening to the audience as I speak. The words and the sounds they make are
Mm.
affecting them physically, and that creates this extraordinary bond, which we're social animals. We say it all the time, but I think we've bloody forgotten what that means. And it doesn't mean all going out to a club necessarily. It means
But
it means
sometimes.
that. Yeah. A little bit. But it means this. It means that we are actually connected, and in live performance, intimate live performance, you can really feel that, and slam
Yes.
capitalizes on that feeling.
Yes. I'd never thought about the water thing. It's really quite something.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, so why okay, this is a question I wanted to ask you when we were talking about capitalism just before, and it's just come to mind. Um Slam is I think it still exists still in a different category to like, you know, poetry
Yeah.
with a capital P in a cursive font. Um and I wonder, do you think that slam or spoken word should be studied, at university? Like would that help kind of
Well, yes, absolutely. And there is moves toward that. I've tutored a course at University of East London. I've done visiting lecture at Goldsmiths University and at Guildhall. Pete, oh God, I nearly called him Pete the Tenth, which is his real his stage name. Pete Bearder published an extraordinary book called Stage Invasion, which is the history of UK spoken word, and
Oh.
it's qualitative, it's quantitative, it's an absolutely brilliant research document, which goes a long way to discussing what it means. And then there's Dr. Katie Aylis, who's a Scottish, well, she's not Scottish, she lives in Scotland. Um, she's an American poet living in Scotland, part of Loud Poets, and she wrote an extraordinary doctorate thesis on the power of slam and spoken word and its
Oh,
transformative
awesome.
effect. So moves are afoot. People are, and one of the things I was talking about this with Raymond Antrobus, like one of the problems is um, we're a very supportive community. We need to continue being that. That's the core of us. But we also need to be a little bit challenging as well, like the circle group. A little
Mm,
bit like that was amazing. It really moved me. Oh my God, I'm crying. Can I read it?
mm,
Ah, yeah. Do you know what? What do you think about this bit here? What do you mean?
mm,
And just to help each other create better art.
mm.
We don't have a tradition of negative criticism that literature and cursive font poetry have. Like, some of it can be very brutal, as you've
Mm,
probably seen. We don't have that tradition. There have been attempts to kind of review poetry, but we're always really, really, really nice and positive.
mm,
So I think we need to, but then we go back to what you were talking about in the neoliberalism, about this process and structure. Do we really want to develop a system of criticism within our scene?
yeah.
What will that do to it? When I talked about the gentrification of the scene, I meant that suddenly non-marginalized people, middle class white people, started to see that our theaters were filling up. It was zeitgeist, it was funky, we're getting TV contracts, some people went
Mm,
viral. Um, and so they came in with their very, very good educations and their extensive vocabularies and their natural self-confidence, learned from a very early age and wiped the stages clean. You know, that's what gentrification
ah.
does. And they don't mean to, but they don't see that we had a thing. We
All
had a
right.
thing.
All right. But how do we build a bridge that supports the weight of everybody rather than just a new group moving on and shunting the others off?
Yeah,
Because when
well,
we just because when I think about, like middle class, like I come from a middle class. Um Grew up in a very working class area, but I was not a part of that community. And when I think about what it means to be middle class now, like young middle class, the middle class is getting squeezed, the middle class is shrinking. We're all kind
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah,
moving down, and this seems to be like a fantastic opportunity,
yeah.
to unionize essentially. Like I was saying to a
Yeah,
friend.
I mean, I hadn't thought of that at all. That's a really interesting point of view. I mean, for me, the I'm reactionary towards gentrification on the
Of
state,
course.
well, anywhere.
Yeah, of
But
course.
because I saw kids who were on Blue Peter, like I won't say one of my kids who took his own life eventually was on TV, was doing all the gigs, but then suddenly is moved slowly off the stage like pennies, in that arcade game.
Yeah, yeah.
But I hadn't thought about what was happening to the middle classes for to mean that we could actually, yeah, we need a bridge. We do. Absolutely. We need a bridge
Because
between.
this is the opportunity, because listen, people don't generally tend to want to dismantle the oppression from which they profit, all right? And
Mm,
like it's a fallible weakness. It's just part of that scummy bit that makes us human, like whatever. But now things aren't working out for the vast majority of people. You know, we're poorer than our parents. We're not going to be able to own homes. The planet's on fire. Like, we're in tens of thousands of pounds of debt for a shitty education that doesn't even get us an entry level job. You know, like, people are pissed. This is surely the moment now to be like, okay, well, screw working in middle class, just be like disadvantaged. We're all disadvantaged right now. So, what are we going to do to help each other? What are we going to do to push forward? And there's still obviously absolutely individual disadvantagedness in that. Of course, there's layers and there's levels. But I personally, you know, like, as a white middle class person now, I don't see the people that went to my private school as my comrades, you know, that are now working for investment banks or whatever, and following their
Yeah,
parents.
I
Like,
mean,
they're not.
it's
I
interesting.
feel like
I
I'm on the
did a
side of other people.
I did a talk, like I said, with Tommy Sissons at Goldsmiths last night about working class writers and art,
Yeah.
you know, and neither of us raised this at all. Neither of us thought about this. That actually, yes, maybe there is a need for a new distinction. It's just I resist getting rid of these working class, middle class, upper class, even though they're not entirely relevant anymore. It's an archaic model. I resist it just because of John Major's classless society and the language of the right, which is constantly disempowering these communities. But maybe you're
Mm,
right. It is time for for the majority to come together, the disadvantaged, and we're all disadvantaged to some degree under this system. And you know, it's an opportunity for us artistically to learn and develop from one another. So whilst I gave a kind of very angry view of the scene a minute ago, there has been great stuff, which has meant that we have watched some of the best page poets on our stages and been inspired and learned from them
mm,
and bought their
mm,
books and
mm,
studied it and start
mm,
getting better ourselves. Equally,
mm.
a poet who would normally stand in front of 10 people and mutter from their book has watched a stage show and thought, oh God, if I just learn them and I
Yeah.
stand up straight and I rehearse, it's about rehearsing. All right. Yeah, and so we're
Mm,
learning these techniques from each other, and the craft as itself then grows.
mhm,
Um, I think a core of all of this is, as we said, neoliberalism, or
mm,
you know, just this. Well, I think of as right wing, culturally right
mm.
wing attempts to control all of us, right down to who's got the most Instagram followers or views of video,
Capital,
every little
capital,
bit.
capital. Yeah.
So I was gonna say there's a brilliant, sort of spoken word piece written by Disraeli. I don't know if you know him. He was,
Mm,
the front man of Disraeli and the Small Gods. He's, a former UK slam champion. He's just a brilliant thinker and writer and musician. And he wrote a piece in response to, Ozymandias, you know, the Ozymandias. Do you know that poem?
no.
Look on my mighty works and despair," or something.
Okay.
Ozymandias is a it's a poem. It's a Shelley poem about, um, Ozymandias, who was kind of a big, pharaoh of Egypt and had huge monuments made of him. And, of course, a couple of thousand years later, they're walking across the desert and they come across these huge monuments. So the poem is a metaphor for all you people who think this is so big, so mighty, it disappears like that.
Mm,
And that's what it's about. And Disraeli wrote about the fact that our Ozymandias now is online, it's digital. And all this investment we're giving in views and follows and, you know, these kind of Insta lives are just add
mm,
water. With all of that, it can disappear overnight. I mean, we are, as artists of all different kinds, I've seen the most extraordinary things attempted on Zoom. You know,
mm.
people doing dance rehearsals together.
Yeah.
They've gone like, "Yeah, well, it's Star Trek. Let's just use Zoom for everything."
Yeah.
And people have done collaborative work. I've had some hilarious sessions where I've tried to do collaborative work. It's very difficult when everybody's Wi-Fi is a different speed to speak at the same time. But people have done amazing things.
Yeah, of course.
And
Of
I
course.
and I would hope, you know, that we use this to obviously what's happening is they're just withdrawing all our funds as artists, and it's getting more and more difficult to survive during this period. But we've also been roused as a country, as a world, we've been roused to see what we value the most. And I saw a meme like, how would you have coped in lockdown without Netflix, without Amazon, without a novel, without watching a piece of theatre on Zoom or
Mm.
whatever? Like, they need to start valuing us as core. It's not a thing it's not like the school where you chose your important subjects and then tick the art at the end or drama. This
Mm.
is core to us as human beings. It's how we communicate, develop, analyze, share, construct. We do it all by sharing different kinds of ideas through different mediums, different kinds of art. You know, I don't think people think of music as art generally,
No,
but
no.
it is, mate.
I It's really funny that you like mentioned that because I read I skimmed an essay yesterday written by a professor at the University of York that was all about the philosophy of a philosopher I've never heard of before, Arno, something Arno.
Mm,
And he emigrated to the US slash fled because of Nazi Germany. And he was a trained musician. He'd studied music. He was a pianist. And he went and he experienced this like hyper capitalist and hyper consumer popular culture of the United States. And he spent his career kind of deconstructing popular culture and talking about how dangerous it is for society because
mm,
not only does it fail to provide the pleasure which it promises, because it doesn't give you true aesthetic pleasure because it requires no energy, no effort, and it gives you nothing. But it also fails society because it doesn't inspire change. It doesn't cause you to question morals or structure, or it doesn't push society forward anymore.
mm,
And we find ourselves at this juncture now where, like, Netflix share prices, Amazon Prime, the share prices have exploded during lockdown because people are looking to that entertainment. But as you say, artists' funding is being cut.
mm.
There is a difference between this popular culture and this art.
Yeah,
And what is going to happen? What is the world going to look like if we completely stop funding art and only give in to the guilty pleasures of entertainment?
yeah.
That's not danger. That's not the kind of art, capital A, that's dangerous that you were speaking about before we started recording.
No,
That's the
exactly.
kind of shit that keeps you numb.
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps you pacified, makes you believe that art is not participatory. We watch
Yes.
it in front of us. So that's why the clubs are so important, and the spoken word clubs and the live venue clubs and the live
Mm,
events, because the people talk back at you. You can smell them.
yeah.
You are participating. If you don't clap, that I'm going to see you
I can follow you.
and follow you, sit on your knee, take
Yeah.
selfies with you all night. That's going to happen. Whereas you can just be sitting in your little Y fronts. What when it's on Zoom or whatever, there's no sort of sense of the fact that you're vital to what's happening as an audience.
Ooh.
I think readers get that to some extent. When you fall in, I'm having trouble reading at the moment, and I think part of the reason, I've no problem reading short things like poetry, but following a
Okay.
novel, I've never struggled in my life. I'm an avid
Mm.
reader. Um, but I think it's because right at the beginning of the pandemic, I overwhelmed myself with social media and, pithy news reports and takes from all over the world. And I've done something neurologically to myself. I have to retrain my brain to think, to focus
Yep.
again,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
But that's actually a thing that they've studied that. Like our
really?
attention spans, our synapse. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yep. We genuinely cannot focus for the same amount of time as generations that grew up without the internet.
Wow.
Like, well, yeah. Yeah. Now
Wow.
it's genuinely done something to our synapses. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm gonna have to you can't get rid of internet now, it's so cool as well. I mean, it's been a brilliant and useful device for all of us, but
Yeah.
especially art. Art has continued throughout all of this. Obviously, it's been a great a lot of my writer friends, I don't know if you felt the same thing, Rachel, but, like, when lockdown happened, they were just like, "So basically it's business as usual then." I literally
Yes.
just sit here, too scared to go out, you know, fight for a bit of food, same day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I only really started to feel the effects psychologically about this month because I was like, I would like to leave now. I would like to
Yeah,
leave and I would like to go and see my pals, in
yeah,
London and in Berlin and in Athens and like go and, see some exhibitions that I'm not cool enough to know where to go to, but my friends know.
yeah.
And I can't. And I'm like, how dare you impinge upon my liberty?
My yearly one trip.
Yes. That I can
The
afford.
weekender. I know. Do you know,
It's
I even booked flights to Thailand. I spent £1,700 on flights to Thailand in December just so that there was a reason for me not to die. Um, and they cancelled the bloody tickets. I was like, "What? How can
a
you
reason.
know there won't be a plane in a year's time? What are you talking about?"
Oh
It's been
my god,
great
that's
talking to you,
amazing.
Rachel. Really great.
Oh, this has been excellent. I have two more questions, right? To wrap us up. Um, First of all, what do you think the literature world needs to do, or writers, poets, what do we need to do to drive the necessary change in the, I don't know, kind of dismantle the literati a little bit?
Okay, so I mean, first of all, value the live event because it's where people come together and network. The
Mm,
audience come for each other as much as they're coming for the poet. So really value that. Look at who's on stage, look at the effects, because that's your community right there. Indie presses of both all small independent presses, first of all, look at this idea of a development program that I'm gonna try to get for Outspoken Press, where we apply to the Arts Council or other funding bodies, depending what kind of body you are, trusts, that sort of thing, if you're a charity, and apply for funding to develop writers, specific writers,
mm,
writers with ideas who've proven themselves because they write every day. Even that has its risks because then again you create a competitive market. If you
yeah,
can only develop 20 writers in a 2-year process, that's out of maybe 2,000 who apply.
yeah,
But you begin. So you begin with these small indie presses. We empower. How about this? We empower hubs of writers. Get together a hub. If you've got 10 writers in your area, then maybe you can get funded as an lit development organization to help you develop better as writers. We need these schemes. We need to make people agents. We need
yeah,
to set up people who understand there's more than 4 stories in the world
yeah,
that there are very many different dynamics and interests. We need and set them up as agents, train them, set them up. We need to educate the big publishers who are listening. Everybody's listening. But it's about, like you say, pushing that actual change to happen, seeing it as serious. I want, my fictional children to be able to read 1,000 narratives from
yes,
different perspectives. I want them
yeah,
to pick up a book and disagree with every word of it,
yeah,
but at the moment we are censoring our fictional children. We are censoring ourselves because
yeah,
what sells? That same
yeah,
bloody love story. I mean, I do watch entertainment films because I know what's gonna happen. It's really not, when I'm eating me dinner, I like to pop
yeah,
on a program where I know within the first 5 minutes who's gonna get off with who and how it's
yeah,
gonna end.
yeah,
And the best films are things like Three Billboards Out of Ebbing, Missouri, where you
yeah,
don't get that gift of
yeah,
entertainment, that satisfaction.
yeah,
I think that's what we do. We challenge ourselves, and it does take bravery from the audience and readership because I have seen my own friends who refuse to go to poetry gigs, and when I beg them because I'm doing a big event, they come, they sit there and they cry. And then they have the most amazing time. They drink, they listen to music. There's a lot of music often involved in these environments. But we are believing that it's hard. Real art is difficult. It's challenging. Oh my God, it's going to be exhausting watching that play because that's what we're told. We're told all the time. Come and just have this candy floss instead. So I think that's what we do.
Yeah.
We create the community to see how successful it's been. This self-organizing on the spoken word or live poetry scene and replicate it in our own hubs. Your idea, your platform idea is perfect. Then,
Mm.
you know, you apply for funding to the Arts Council, get people on board to partner with you, and you begin.
Yeah.
Every literature development organization, like Spread the Word, started with one person, often an artist, outspoken itself. We're all writers and
Yeah.
musicians, you know. It starts from needing to support your own career and
Yeah.
very quickly seeing how you can help everybody else.
Fantastic. And there's something I just want to add very quickly as a little appendix to that. Like, see, with the impending, it's here, the climate crisis, and we're not going to be able to travel as much. Like, that is just going to be sanctioned. We're not going to have as easy access to other cultures, literature, film, a diversity of narratives so that we can still experience people on the other side of the world. That is where we're going to be able to continue evolving,
100%.
civilization or deconstructing it's going to be more necessary than ever
Yeah.
again. And so we need to start investing in it now.
Yeah. And the people, the executives, the people who are making the decisions, you know,
Yeah.
because,
All of you decision makers listening,
yeah,
you
you
know.
could go and get someone to shadow you straight away, please. You
Yeah.
know, go to the ends, go to spaces. Don't just go to Oxford and Cambridge or one of the universities. You can do that too, but go
Yeah.
to places that are unexpected. Do what Murky Books did, you know, challenge everything in in um
Yeah.
in the way things are set up because you know as well as I do it's going to become funky very quickly. But
Yeah.
of course you're so shallow. But like literally you make a movement by making the movement.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. God, this has been so great. Finally, who would you like to platform?
Who would I like to platform?
Yeah,
I'm
someone I can get on the
someone I can get to the show. You've had Lisa Lux, yeah?
yeah.
Okay, great. Have you had Safia?
Yes.
Have
I
you
had Lisa, Safia,
uh,
Alice, you.
me? Basically all of us.
Yeah.
Let's think somebody uh, uh, uh actually I know who might be really interesting for you. Bridget Minimal. Do you know Bridget Minimal?
No.
She's a poet, but she's also a broadcaster and she writes for The Guardian sometimes.
Oh, okay.
She's published by Outspoken Press. She's a great kind of cultural commentator. So I think like she's a really
Yeah.
interesting person to have on. Or Sarah Jane Lee. The reason I
Okay.
hesitate is she's based out in Singapore. So
Right.
might be a bit difficult for you to kind of negotiate an interview with. Sarah Fletcher's got a new book coming out on Outspoken very soon. And she's a wonderful, kind of very surreal, disturbing writer. And I know
Ooh,
she'd give you a lot of really interesting things to think about. Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you, Joelle. This has been nothing short of inspiring. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming.
Brilliant.
Hey everyone, you can find Joelle on Twitter at jtaylortrash, and very importantly, you can pick up a copy of her latest collection, c+nto and Othered Poems, from any major bookseller. You can also find the link over at www.platformenterprise.com, where, if you're a person pissed off with capitalism, I highly recommend you subscribing to this podcast and my newsletter. Thank you so much for your support. See you next week.